Hi, thanks for listening to this podcast. This podcast was recorded as a series of lectures given about spirituality and how spirituality impacts on us and our recovery. This particular podcast is focused on narcissism and how that impacts on us particularly. Please feel free to send me a mail or comment on this podcast if you have any queries or disagree with anything that I have to say. Thanks. There's a few things I want to talk about, but the thing that I want to start with is narcissism. And narcissism is quite interesting because the first time that somebody mentions the word narcissism to me, I think that I know what the definition of the word means. I know what the interpretation of the word means. So if I think somebody is a narcissistic person, that they're completely in love with themselves, that's kind of where my thinking goes. Somebody who's in love with himself, which is not really a very good description, but I think it really is kind of the TV interpretation of what narcissism is. If you watch enough TV, that's certainly the idea that I had. And I think it gets very much confused in the same manner that the word ego gets confused, because everybody always thinks if somebody has a big ego, that they think a lot of themselves, that they think they're very self-important, think everything starts and begins with them, which is not necessarily what ego means. So I had a little bit of a look. Now, you would think that working in the treatment center here that I've come into contact with narcissistic people. I think there's also a side of that coin, is that we all have a level of narcissism. If you want to try and identify it and try and understand what it is, how important is it to have some of that inside of ourselves? So I was listening to a couple of guys talk about narcissism, and it really piqued my interest. The myth around narcissists. Has anybody heard of narcissists and the myth of narcissists? I'll tell you about it. This is where the word narcissism originates from. It originates from Greek mythology. In the myth, Narcissus falls in love with the reflection of himself in a pond, in a pool of water, and eventually dies staring at his own reflection in the pool. Now, that's a very simple retelling of the story, but it's the story that I'm familiar with. That's how I know of Narcissus and narcissism. It's been the basis for a lot of art as well. If you go and do a search online, and just look at the amount of painters who have done these beautiful canvases, and I've had a look at some of them, and they really, really are spectacular. The Renaissance painters, all of those kind of things, statues, carvings, bronzes, all of those kind of things. Specifically about this one myth, and it really it's an idea. And why I like it so much, why I like the idea so much, is because this idea comes from BC. You're looking at like between 80 and 40 BC in the information. That's how long this myth has been around. That means that this myth has been around for more than 2,000 years. People have been recounting the same story and talking about the same story. Now, I do think about how this applies to me. Otherwise, what would the purpose of the exercise be? I could sit here and I could tell you a story, and it would be very entertaining, or might put you to sleep. But what is important is, how is this beneficial to me, and how does this help me? And while I was looking at this stuff, I started thinking about my self-perception, how I perceive myself and how I think about myself, which is, I believe, where the myth originated from and what the purpose of the myth was. If you think about any kind of art, any kind of writing, any kind of storytelling, if the person is not writing purely or doing art purely for their own entertainment, then they're doing something like that to provoke a little bit of thought, so that, we can think about something, maybe get some kind of message across. And that's maybe why the myth of Narcissus has been so enduring, because it's so relevant. And it's something that's quite easily identifiable and quite easily accessible. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to look at a myth and try and understand what a myth is and what a myth is talking about. My friend was doing a writing degree. He wanted to become a writer. It was his dream to become a writer. And in his first year at UNICEF, part of his first year studies was Greek and Roman mythology. And there's a lot of cross-pollination between the two mythologies. So the story goes that, and this is something that I really think about a lot, and that is very pertinent to me, because there are a number of versions of this myth. There are a number of ways of recounting the story. So each retelling of the story really has a lot to do with the perception of the person who is telling the story. And I'm a very big believer in our perception clouds everything. And our perception is the one thing that we have some ability to work on slowly over a period of time that requires specific dedication to look at. But I believe that's what the purpose of these groups are for, is to help us with our perception. To start thinking about perception. Is the way that you're seeing things necessarily the way that things are? Are you sure? How do you know? Just because you think that this is the way that it is, then that means that's the way that it is. That's not necessarily true. How far are you willing to go to force your perception through on something? The example that always springs to my mind when I recount this perception idea is when we look at communism. Now, if we look specifically at what's happening currently in Venezuela with regards to communism, interestingly, with regards to communism, because farming has taken such a dive, and the people have no access to proper resources, proper food and stuff like that, the amount of people that are dying of malnutrition, the government has no longer allowed them to say how many children, allow them to count how many children are dying of malnutrition and report on that. So they have this perception, they have this idea, they have this ideology that they're forcing through. They don't care what they need to do to force it through, whether it's right or whether it's wrong. This is the way that they're going to be doing it, which is insane, which is... I need to do a little bit of research on who's in charge there, but usually there's one person, who is forcing things through the way that he thinks things need to be done with his stooges and his collaborators. So it's very important to be aware of our perception and the impact that our perception has on situations, because there is a very clear example of what happens when somebody doesn't care and thinks that they're right at all costs and do whatever the hell they want. That's what happens. So we need to be very aware of how we're seeing things. Is this the truth? Is this really what is going on? And we're talking about the myth of Narcissus. Now the story goes that Narcissus was a very, very attractive young man. Very, very attractive. And his parents were worried, and friends of the family were worried, and they made sure that there were no mirrors in the house, there were no shiny pot lids, there was nothing that he could see the reflection of himself. They protected him from the view of himself. But somehow he gathered this idea anyway, that he was a very attractive person. And one day he was walking through the woods. Now, this all happened, the story that I'm recounting happened in Greece, in a place called Thespia. But from Greece, my brother-in-law's from Greece, I'm sure he knows exactly where it is. It's, if I'm not mistaken, close to modern-day Thebe, wherever that is, not 100% sure. And he was the son of Sisyphus, who was a river god, and Leurope, who was a naiad, a water naiad. Now, part of the mythology around the river gods and the water gods is what the ancient Greeks believed is that all water was connected. So that a river god from one area could appear in another area, which is quite an interesting thought. And while I was looking at the history of this stuff, a water naiad was something different from a river god, but something that was specific to freshwater and freshwater ponds, and had a reputation for either being very wise and kind and helpful, or quite vengeful. So, I mean, you can think in times gone by, either a pond of water could either be extremely helpful to you wherever you are, or it could kill you. If it had bugs or germs in it or something like that, could take you out. So it's quite easy to see where something like this could be generated from the perception of the people at the time who had no idea about bacteria and stuff like that in water. And they used to make sacrifices and drown animals in the ponds as sacrifices to the gods. That's the way that they used to do things. So Narcissus was walking through the woods, and he was seen by Echo. Echo was a mountain nymph, and she immediately fell in love with him. But there was a problem with Echo. Zeus, who was everybody knows who Zeus was. He was the king of the gods,
God of the gods,
on Mount Olympus. And Zeus, every now and again, used to take a break from Mount Olympus. Now, Zeus's wife was Hera, and Hera was obviously the queen of the gods, the goddess of family, of woman, of birth, childbirth, all of those kind of things. And Zeus used to come down from Mount Olympus, and he used to consort with the with the mountain nymphs and the water nymphs and all of these, and Hera got suspicious. Excuse me. Hera got suspicious of what Zeus was doing when he used to come off of Mount Olympus, and one day went down to go and see what he was up to, and Zeus had somehow managed to convince Echo to kind of stand up to Hera to kind of, calm her down and keep things, keep whatever was happening under wraps. And she got angry with Echo and made it so that the last words that Echo spoke were the last words that she ever spoke. And as a result of this, when Echo saw Narcissus, she couldn't tell him how she felt about him because she couldn't speak. Now, what happened as a result of this is that because of her love for Narcissus, this unrequited love, because what actually happened is she approached him and he spurned her for whatever reason. The story goes that she wandered the mountains and the glens and the glades until she faded away. Hence the echo. Again, which is quite interesting if you think in terms of this is stuff that people came up with. That's as far as I can go. I mean, I sit here today, 2,000 years later, and I think to myself, how is it possible that people can think that an echo is a god? Maybe they didn't. Maybe it is a bit of a stretch of the imagination. But it's a myth. And again, it's perception. Because remember, this is the whole thing that we're looking at. We're looking at the interpretation of what is going on in our mind. What is it that I'm thinking about, what it is that I'm seeing, and how this works. And Narcissus hasn't even gotten to the pond yet. But Nemesis hears about this. Nemesis is an aspect of Aphrodite. I'm sure everybody here must have heard of Aphrodite. Aphrodite was the god of love and beauty and procreation. And a different aspect of Aphrodite was Nemesis, which is the god of vengefulness and revenge. And she heard about what Narcissus did to Echo. And she decided to take revenge on him and lured him to this pond where he saw his own reflection for the first time. And then was unable to move away from that. Now, if I think about this in terms of the importance of what I'm talking about, if I think about myself, not how I look, but I think about myself all the time, how does this situation impact me? How is this important to me? Sorry. So we're talking about how much time do we spend thinking about ourselves? What is important to me? What do I need to do to make this happen? What do I need to arrange? What anxiety do I face when I'm faced with certain situations? How is this going to anger me, or how is this going to make me happy? Am I stuck in a situation like Narcissus, where all that I'm doing is just observing a reflection of myself? What I need, what I want, what I, me. Now, anybody who's taken a look at the AA Big Book will have seen what it talks about in step 3. And it's quite clear in step 3. What step 3 says to us is, primarily, what we want to do is we want to address our selfishness. Selfishness is the primary obstacle we face in step 3. Now, this is not a new idea, obviously, because I'm recounting a myth to you about narcissism, and if you see it the way that I see it, if you understand what I'm saying to you the way that I've looked at it, is that this self-obsession comes from way back. People have been looking at this stuff and trying to identify these things for a very, very long time. To think that we somehow just exempt from these things because we don't like the way that the word sounds, that's our perception of things. That's what we think. It's not necessarily so. Just because I think something is this way doesn't mean that it is this way. And how much effort have I put in to find out? So, some of you might know a little bit of the history of AA. AA was started as well, it wasn't really started, but it took some of its ideas from a religious organization. And the person who founded that organization, it was an organization called the Oxford Groups. The person who founded that organization, and that organization is still running today. It's changed its names a few times. I might have the name here. I don't think so. I did write it down somewhere. No, I don't have it. It's changed its name a few times, but it's still in operation. AA has been around for more than 80 years. This organization was kind of the precursor. So it was more religious and more churchy, and they wanted to change it to make the focus more on alcoholism and recovering from alcoholism for anybody who wanted to, as opposed to belonging to a specific organization to be able to do that. His idea, what he believed, was that selfishness was the root cause of humanity. It was the root cause of all the problems of humanity. That all that we think about is ourselves and what we want. And this stuff that I'm talking about, the constant evaluating from our own perspectives, is how does this impact on me? The word that we use today, narcissistic way of thinking. I said a little bit earlier that working in the treatment center, that perhaps I'd come across some narcissistic people. There's an idea that I've been working on for a very, very long time, something that I've been thinking about for a considerable amount of time, and that's self-esteem. Now, I believe that self-esteem is a myth. I don't believe that having a good self-esteem is this huge thing that we make it out to be. And what has brought me to that belief is a lot of personal experience. So personal experience will always be anecdotal experiences, one person's experience with these kind of things. So I'll share my experience with you. I always believed that if I could build up my confidence and have enough confidence, I'd be okay to do some of the things that I needed to get done in my life, because I lacked that self-confidence. I lacked what I thought was called self-esteem. I want to give you, I went and had a look at a couple of definitions on some scientific papers. So I'd just like to read a little bit to you. I hope it doesn't put you to sleep, and that you're okay to have a listen. Usually when people read to me, I go straight to sleep, but let me read to you quickly. Overall, the benefits of high self-esteem fall into two categories: enhanced initiative and pleasant feelings. We have not found evidence that boosting self-esteem by therapeutic interventions or school programs causes benefits. Our findings do not support continued widespread efforts to boost self-esteem in the hope that it will by itself foster improved outcomes. In view of heterogeneity of high self-esteem, indiscriminate praise might just as easily promote narcissism with its less desirable consequences. Instead, we recommend using praise to boost self-esteem as a reward for socially desirable behavior and self-improvement. The Association for Psychological Sciences. What they're saying there is, and this is absolutely, it makes so much sense to me. I believe that I'm not going to be able to perform because I have low self-esteem. This is an idea that I've come up with myself. So I'm looking to improve my self-esteem. The way that self-esteem gets improved is if I accomplish things. People will tell me that I'm doing well, or if I look a certain way, people will tell me that I'm an attractive person, that things will come into my life as a result of that. But what if that's not necessarily true, or even if it is true, but I don't feel that way, and that's not what's happening to me. Now, there's an experience that I like to call, and that I think I'm accurate in, the self-worth, which is something that we feel when we accomplish something great. We do something well. We do well on a test. Our children do well. We have success in our business. We have success in our lives. We run a marathon. We do a cycling race. We do something extraordinary that makes us feel good about ourselves, that boosts our self-worth. But that, unfortunately, only lasts for a short period of time. I'll give you an example. As part of my studies to become a counselor, I had to write an exam. As part of that exam, I had to do an ethics course. On that ethics course, the adjudicator for the exam said to me that I had scored the highest marks that had ever been achieved on that test. I was tremendously pleased with that accomplishment, and obviously went and told everybody about it, and it really boosted my self-worth, and for about 2 weeks I felt really, really, really great, telling everybody that I'm the most ethical person in the whole country, etc., etc., etc. But it fades with time. So then is the question that I continually need to be driving and pursuing accomplishment so that I can feel that way? No, because you speak to people, speak to overachievers that have burned themselves out and have been unable to do it. Elon Musk has just said how on the edge he's been for the last while. Anybody who's been following what's happening in his career will know he's one of the highest performers in the world. You would think that there's a guy who should be feeling great. The stress is on top of him, and he admits it, which I think is an admirable and a great thing. So, getting this, people giving us praise, which was actually it was a self-esteem movement that was created in the 80s. that if you give people praise and encourage them and tell them that they're doing great, what the studies are saying is that what it does is it creates narcissism more than anything else, because then people expect praise for doing nothing. You just have to be there, and then people are going to think you're wonderful, and it doesn't work like that. You have to really achieve to feel worth. So, running a little bit out of time. I've been so long-winded with my stories here. So, in line with this discussion that we're having, that I've had now about narcissism, and in the little bit of information that I've spoken about regarding self-esteem, how do I feel better about myself as a person? If people are not going to be coming up to me all of the time and telling me how wonderful I am, and if they do, that in essence what it is that it's really bad for me, that it's not helpful, and if I can't, like a shark, they say that if sharks stop swimming, they die. All I have to do is I just have to achieve and achieve and achieve and achieve, and the only way to keep my self-worth up is to achieve and achieve and achieve, and it's humanly impossible to keep that up. What is left? How do I find myself? How do I feel better about myself? Because I've got this thinking the whole time, like narcissists looking in the pond, looking at myself and evaluating myself and thinking about myself and how I don't measure up to the way that I think that things are supposed to be, and how everybody else is. Not even taking into account that when I look at another person, I'm looking at 20, 30, 40 years of self-defense mechanisms that person has put up, so that they can't see, so that no one can see how they're feeling. For the purposes of this discussion, the narcissistic bent and the ego are similar. Okay, so 2,000 years later, you can be diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. There are specific criteria that a professional person can look at and identify and then say, this person has narcissistic personality disorder. And it's either a lot of expectation around being praised. A person thinks that they don't really need to do much in order to be fabulous. To get all of this effort. I should easily be able to walk into any position and just get the position just because I was there. It's an exaggeration. I mean, there's shades of intensity. But still leads us to that question, still leads me always back to the question, if it's not self-esteem, if it's not about what people are telling me, and I've always known that it's not about what people tell me about who I am that makes me who I am. It's about what I am inside, what I believe inside. If it's not constantly striving for affirmation, then what is the answer? And the answer, the start of the way out, is meaning and purpose. Meaning and purpose. And you will know when you are doing something in your life that is meaningful and that has purpose. And that is not selfish. Now, I'm talking about being of service. Not because you have to. I'm talking about going above and beyond what you're currently doing to find that meaning and purpose. Because there's something that happens in an environment like that that enables us to find out more about ourselves. So here's an example. I don't have to. I come and I volunteered to do this group Taku used to run this group 3 times a week. I volunteered to do this group. I don't have to do this group. As a result of coming in and doing this group, I spend a substantial amount of time gathering information and putting information together to try and communicate the message, to try and teach you something that you can use in your time here in the treatment center to help you be more successful in your recovery, to help you in concern group, which is, or perhaps to help you after concern group, you know. So, as a let's just say as an example, as a teacher, I'm forced to find out more about myself, to become more aware of the things that are going on inside of myself, because I will not come here and sit and talk about things that I don't apply and practice in my life. This stuff all comes from my own personal experience. Just like all the work that I do here in the treatment center is all from my own experience. If I teach and do things here in the treatment center that I'm not practicing, I'm going to drive myself to drink. I can't sit here and lie and be fake about what it is that I'm trying to do. That gives my life meaning and purpose. And slowly, because remember, landing up in rehab, you've taken many years of putting chemicals in your body to move away from any semblance of normality, if you ever had any of that to start off with. It takes time, and it takes commitment, and it takes dedication and focus to change things inside ourselves. So over a period of time, we retrain our minds, and it becomes, the beginning of it is around being aware of the impact that our perception has on everything that we do, and how much or how little work we do to try and clarify our perspective. Cool. I'm out of time.